The sky was still red from the fire of fallen ships. Smoke rose in black towers, and the ground was filled with broken machines and shattered weapons. He walked slowly, his boots pressing over the dust of a war that had ended too quickly. His name was Daniel, once a soldier of Earth, now only a survivor. He carried nothing but a torn bag, inside it a few rations left. Each step he took felt heavier, but he refused to fall. He had survived the unexpected war, but he did not know if survival was a gift or a curse. He stopped near the ruins of a tank. The metal was bent like paper, a reminder of how powerful the alien attack had been. Daniel knelt, searching the ground for anything useful. His fingers found a broken knife, dull but still sharp enough to cut bread. He placed it in his belt, breathing hard. Hunger was biting his stomach, and thirst burned his throat. He reached into his bag, pulled out a small packet of dried food, and opened it with care. The smell was not pleasant, but it meant life. As he prepared to eat, he felt the silence around him shift. Something moved between the rubble. His hand tightened on the dull knife, eyes scanning the shadows. Then he saw it, a pair of glowing amber eyes, low to the ground, watching him. At first he thought it was another soldier crawling for help, but when the figure stepped closer, Daniel's breath froze. It was small, covered in striped fur with silver patterns across its back. Its sharp teeth flashed as it sniffed the air. The creature looked like a mix of a tiger and something more alien, its movements strange yet graceful. It was not human, but a cub. The cub's eyes locked onto the food in Daniel's hands. It growled softly, not in anger but in hunger. Daniel knew he should push it away, maybe even kill it before its mother appeared. But he looked at the tiny frame, the ribs showing beneath its fur, the weakness in its legs. It was starving. Without thinking, Daniel placed the ration on the ground and slid it forward. The cub hesitated, then rushed forward, grabbing the food with sharp teeth. It tore into the packet, chewing hungrily, while keeping its glowing eyes on Daniel. The soldier just sat there, tired and silent, letting the cub eat. For the first time since the war, he did not feel alone. When the food was gone, the cub licked its mouth and gave a strange sound, half growl and half purr. Then, without warning, it turned and ran into the forest that bordered the battlefield. Daniel almost laughed at the strangeness of it. He shook his head and leaned back against the broken tank, closing his eyes. Perhaps kindness was a weakness, he thought. Perhaps feeding that creature was a mistake. But deep inside, he felt a warmth he had not felt in months. He had saved something, even if it was small. His eyes grew heavy, and for a moment he rested. That was when the noise came. A deep growl shook the air. His eyes snapped open, knife already in hand. From the shadows of the trees, the sound grew, louder. The ground seemed to tremble as something massive stepped forward. The cub had returned, but it was not alone. Behind it, towering over the ruins, was a figure unlike any Daniel had seen before. She was tall, her body covered in the same silver-striped fur, but her form was powerful, fierce, and terrifying. Her head was crowned with sharp ears, her fangs long and shining, her claws cutting into the soil as she walked. This was no cub. This was the mother. Daniel's heart pounded, but he did not move. The cub ran to her side, rubbing against her leg, making soft sounds. The mother's eyes followed, glowing with fire, and then turned to Daniel. She looked at him with both suspicion and rage, her chest rising as if ready to roar. Daniel gripped his knife tighter, but his mind was clear. He had no chance against such a creature. If she wanted him dead, he would be gone in seconds. Still, he held his ground. He did not run. He did not bow. He simply looked back into her burning eyes. For a long moment, the air was silent, only broken by the breathing of man and beast. The cub tugged at her leg as if telling her a story Daniel could not hear. The mother tilted her head, her eyes narrowing. She stepped closer, her massive shadow falling across his body. Daniel did not blink. He had survived the war, the fire, and the hunger. Now he stood before the fiercest creature he had ever seen. The question was not if he would live or die. The question was why the cub had brought her back to him. The mother's eyes glowed like burning stars. Her massive frame stood over the broken ground, taller than any human Daniel had ever faced. Her muscles shifted under striped silver fur, and her long claws pressed into the earth as if ready to tear it apart. The cub stayed close to her leg, purring softly, though its eyes still kept glancing at Daniel. He understood nothing of their language, yet the scene was clear. The cub had told her about him. She had come because of what he had done. Feeding the cub had brought the mother here. Daniel did not move. His knife remained in his hand, but he did not raise it. What good was a small blade against a creature that looked like living armor and fury? She was strong enough to kill him with a single strike, yet she only stared at him, her head tilting slightly as though measuring his worth. The cub growled in protest when her claws scraped the ground, as if asking her to stop. Daniel's heart pounded, but he forced himself to stand still. He would not show fear. Soldiers who showed fear in battle often died faster. The mother stepped closer. Her shadow covered him, and Daniel felt her hot breath on his face. She lowered her head, her nose inches away, smelling him. A rumble came from her throat, deep and heavy. Her eyes narrowed, then widened, showing a mix of confusion and anger. She had expected prey. Instead, she found a man who refused to kneel. The cub made another soft sound, climbing slightly onto her leg, pawing at her as though explaining something only she could understand. Her gaze sharpened. She understood. This human had given food to her child. Daniel swallowed, but his voice was steady when he finally spoke. "If you're going to kill me, do it fast." His words meant nothing to her, but his tone did. She leaned back, her ears twitching at the sound of his voice. Something in his courage stopped her from attacking. Her kind, respected strength, even if it came from a weaker body. The cub pressed its small head against her chest, making a sound that seemed almost like a plea. The mother's fangs parted, but no roar came. Instead, she released a sound that was sharp, commanding, almost like speech. Daniel could not understand the words, but he felt the weight of them. The cub answered with a chirp-like cry, and then looked at him, as if including him in a secret. Slowly, the mother straightened her back, no longer crouched in attack. Her glowing eyes still carried threat, but there was also something else. Curiosity. She circled him once, every step shaking the ground, while Daniel turned carefully to keep her in sight. He realized she was not only testing his courage. She was judging if he was worthy of being near her cub. She stopped behind him. The sound of her breathing made his neck stiffen. Then, in a swift move, her claw tapped the dull knife at his side. The blade clattered to the ground. She had not cut him, only disarmed him. It was a warning. His knife was useless, and she knew it. He bent, picked it back up, and slid it into his belt. He met her eyes again. The cub purred with approval, wagging its tail, clearly pleased that he had not backed down. For reasons Daniel could not understand, that small act seemed to soften her rage. The forest around them grew louder, with alien birds calling in the distance. Daniel knew danger lurked beyond the trees. Other creatures had survived the war. Some were worse than the Tigress before him. He realized then that her appearance might not be a curse, but a strange form of salvation. If she had wanted him dead, he would already be gone. Instead, she was still standing there, as if deciding whether he had earned the right to keep breathing. The cub nudged her again, growling softly toward the forest as though warning her of something. She lifted her head sharply, sniffing the air. Then she growled, a sound that echoed like thunder. Daniel's instinct screamed danger. Something else was coming. He saw her claws extend fully, her body tense for battle. For the first time, he saw not just a beast, but a warrior. She looked at him again, and this time her expression was clear. She did not see him as prey anymore. She saw him as something else. Perhaps a tool, perhaps a protector. The cub had chosen him, and that choice carried weight. In her world, feeding a cub created a bond that could not be broken. Daniel did not know their law. He only knew the truth of the moment. He had shown kindness, and now he stood in the presence of a queen. She growled again, but not at him. She was warning whatever hid in the forest. The cub pressed against her leg, still glancing back at him, almost urging him to stay close. Daniel tightened his fists, knowing he had no power in this world of monsters and warriors. Yet when her glowing eyes met his again, he felt something strange. Not hatred, not threat, something like recognition. For reasons he could not explain, the Tigress mother had spared him. Daniel followed the Tigress mother at a distance, unsure if she allowed him or simply tolerated his presence. The cub kept looking back at him, its glowing eyes shining with trust, as though guiding him forward. The mother walked with silent strength, her tail sweeping the air like a weapon. She was aware of him even when her gaze stayed forward. Daniel felt it in her movements, in the way her ears twitched whenever he stepped too close. He was not her equal, not yet, but she had not cast him aside either. That was enough for now. The forest swallowed them whole. Its trees stretched high, twisted with vines that glowed faintly in the dark. Strange calls echoed in the distance, creatures hunting, moving, watching. Daniel kept his dull knife ready, though he knew it was useless against the dangers around him. Hunger gnawed at him again, but he said nothing. He was learning to move silently like them, his steps lighter, his breathing slower. He had become part of their shadow, though not truly one of them. Each sound, each rustle in the leaves felt like a test of his courage. He could not fail in front of her. At one point, the cub darted off the path, chasing a small insect that glowed like a lantern. Daniel's first instinct was to follow, but the Tigress mother's head snapped toward him. Her sharp eyes warned him to stay where he was. He froze, waiting, trusting her command, though he did not understand her words. When the cub returned, laughing in its strange, growl-like way, Daniel realized the truth. She was not only watching him, she was training him. Every choice she allowed or denied was part of her judgment. The cub's bond had forced her to keep him near, but whether she would ever trust him depended on how he acted. As night fell, they reached the edge of a broken ridge where old war machines lay in pieces. Daniel knew this place. It had been a human defense line destroyed in the first wave of invasion. Burnt steel and broken helmets littered the ground. His chest tightened at the memory of lost brothers. He crouched near a half-buried radio, touching the cold surface. But before sadness could take him, he heard the Tigress mother's growl. She had sensed something. Daniel scanned the dark, his soldier's instincts waking. Figures moved between, the shadows silent and fast. Raiders, these were not beasts. They were aliens who thrived in chaos, scavengers of war, killers of both human and alien survivors. Their eyes gleamed like knives, and their weapons were sharp spears of metal and bone. They circled, whispering in their strange tongue. Daniel counted at least 6. He gritted his teeth, his hand tightening on his useless knife. The Tigress mother stepped in front of her cub, claws out, fangs bared, ready to fight them all. But Daniel saw the danger. They were not attacking blindly. They wanted to trap her, separate her from the cub. They had done this before. He had seen such tricks in war. Daniel crouched low, scanning the ridge. The broken machines gave him an idea. He crawled behind a fallen cannon, pulling loose wires and shards of metal. The raiders were distracted by the Tigress's fury, not noticing him move. Quickly he tied sharp fragments into a line, stretching it between 2 rocks where shadows covered it. His hands worked fast, memory guiding him. He had made traps in ruined cities before. By the time one of the raiders spotted him, it was too late. The alien lunged, but its foot caught the wire. With a scream, it fell, impaled on sharp metal. Blood sprayed and chaos erupted. The Tigress mother roared, shaking the ground. She launched forward, striking 2 raiders with a single sweep of her claws. The cub hid behind a rock, its eyes wide but unafraid. Daniel grabbed a fallen spear, swinging it hard against another raider. Pain shot through his arm, but the enemy stumbled, giving the Tigress time to finish it. The fight was brutal, fast, and loud. The forest itself seemed to watch. When silence finally returned, bodies lay scattered around the ridge. The Tigress stood tall, her chest heaving, her claws dripping. Daniel leaned on the broken cannon, his breath heavy. The spear, still in his hand, the cub ran to him first, nuzzling his leg with a purr. Daniel froze, then slowly placed a hand on its striped head. It was warm, alive, trusting. When he looked up, he found the mother staring at him. Her eyes were unreadable, but not as sharp as before. She had seen his courage. She had seen his mind at work, setting traps like a hunter. He had not run. He had fought beside her. For the first time, her growl was not filled with threat. It was softer, almost a sound of respect. Daniel dropped the spear and stood straight, meeting her gaze. He had no words she could understand, but his eyes carried his message. He would not abandon her cub. He would not abandon this fight. Something passed between them then, silent, yet strong. She looked at the cub, then back at him. Finally, she turned and walked forward, her massive tail swaying. The cub followed happily, and when Daniel stepped after them, she did not stop him. She had not chosen him yet, but she had allowed him to stay, and in her world, that meant more than words could ever say. The night was heavy with silence after the raid. The forest smelled of blood, smoke, and fear, but it was not over. Daniel knew raiders never attacked once. They followed survivors, waiting for weakness, striking again and again. His body ached from the fight, yet he did not rest. He moved through the broken ridge, searching for anything useful. The tigress mother watched him closely. Her cub curled at her feet. Her glowing eyes reflected the firelight from a burning machine, studying him like a puzzle. She had fought beside him, yet still she did not fully trust him. Daniel found a metal flask under the ruins. It was dented, but inside was rainwater caught by chance. He took a small sip and then placed it near the cub. The little creature lapped at it eagerly, tail flicking with happiness. The mother gave a low growl, but it was not anger. It was warning. She was telling him she noticed everything. Daniel nodded once, showing respect. He was beginning to understand her without words. He did not see her only as a beast anymore. She was something greater, something proud, something carrying weight beyond his world. As the hours passed, faint drumming sounds rose from the distance. Daniel stiffened. That was not nature. That was war. The tigress mother lifted her head, ears twitching, claws sliding out. The cub pressed against her side nervously. Then they came. Dozens of raiders, armored this time, moving as one under the dim moonlight. They had been hunting, and now they had cornered their prey. Spears glowed with strange fire, and heavy nets hung in their claws. Daniel understood in a heartbeat. This was no raid. This was a capture. He fought the urge to run. He looked at the tigress mother. Her fangs were bared, but even she seemed to know the danger. There were too many. She roared, shaking the trees, but the raiders did not scatter. They advanced with steady steps, their leader raising a spear high. In a flash, nets flew. Daniel cut one aside with his knife, but two raiders crashed into him, knocking him to the ground. He struck back with desperate fury, but his strength was small against their numbers. The cub screamed, clawing at a net, but was dragged away. Daniel's heart broke at the sound. The tigress mother roared, her claws cutting two raiders down, yet heavy chains wrapped around her legs. She thrashed, but even her power was not enough. Together, they were taken. The prison was a pit carved into the earth, its walls lined with bone and iron. The raiders threw them inside like trophies. Daniel landed hard, gasping for breath, his hands bound by rough rope. The tigress mother fell beside him, her chest heaving, her eyes burning with fury. The cub whimpered, trapped in a smaller cage of steel bars. Daniel crawled closer, his body aching, and pressed his hand against the cage. The cub pushed its small paw against his fingers, its glowing eyes trembling with fear. Something inside Daniel hardened then. He had lost too many brothers in the war. He would not lose this cub. The eye. Raiders celebrated above the pit, their voices echoing with cruelty. Torches blazed, shadows danced, and the sound of drums thundered like a storm. Daniel leaned against the wall, his mind racing. He had been trained for survival, not surrender. He studied the ropes, twisting his wrists, biting against the fibers, until blood came. Slowly, painfully, the rope weakened. He forced himself to stay calm. The tigress mother watched him, her ears flat, her breathing rough. She had no escape. But when her glowing eyes met his, there was something different in them. Not judgment, not rage. It was trust, fragile but real. Hours crawled. The raiders grew drunk with their own victory. Some fell asleep near the fires. Others left to hunt more prey. Daniel's wrists finally slipped free, skin torn and raw. He crouched low, grabbing a stone sharp enough to cut. He moved to the tigress mother, cutting at the thick rope binding her legs. She growled, but softly, careful not to alert the guards. When the last rope snapped, she rose to her full height, her muscles shaking with rage. Daniel pointed toward the cub's cage. She understood. Together they moved. He crept toward the bars, pulling at the lock with trembling hands. It would not break. His knife was too dull. The cub cried inside, scratching against the bars. Daniel clenched his jaw, searching, then spotted a torch resting against a rack of weapons. He grabbed it, pressing the fire against the lock. Metal hissed and weakened. With a final strike of stone, it snapped. The cub burst out, leaping into his arms before darting to its mother. For the first time, Daniel saw her lower her head and touch the cub gently, her growl soft and deep. It was the sound of a promise. But the alarm had begun. A raider stirred, his eyes widening at the sight of open cages. Daniel snatched a fallen spear, driving it into the raider before he could shout. The tigress mother leaped, ripping another apart with one strike. The cub darted between them, quick and clever. The pit turned into chaos, fire spilling, bones, breaking screams filling the night. Daniel fought like he never had before, his arms burning, his voice raw with fury. When they finally burst through the camp's wall, running into the wild night, they were no longer strangers. They were allies bound by fire. When dawn broke, the three of them rested at the edge of a cliff, the world below wide and endless. The tigress mother stood tall, her cub pressed against her side, but her eyes did not leave Daniel. He sat nearby, bruised and bleeding, but alive. For the first time, he allowed himself to breathe. He had fought beside her, saved her cub, and endured the fire of the raiders. And she had let him live. In her silence, in her steady gaze, he knew something had changed. She did not only see him as tolerated, she now saw him as worthy. The forest woke with screams before the sun rose. Daniel opened his eyes, his muscles sore, his wounds still fresh. He sat up quickly, his knife in his hand. The tigress mother was already awake, her ears sharp, her glowing eyes scanning the trees. The cub pressed close to her side, growling softly. Something was wrong. The silence of the night had broken, and now the air smelled of smoke and ash. Daniel knew the raiders had not given up. They were coming again, and this time they would not make the mistake of underestimating them. He stood, gripping his dull blade, though it felt like nothing compared to the enemy's weapons. His chest burned with fear, but his mind stayed clear. Running was not an option. If they ran, the raiders would chase and the cub would not survive. The only way forward was to fight. He looked at the tigress mother. She was tense, her claws digging into the ground, her chest rising like thunder before a storm. Her eyes locked onto his. For a brief moment, no words were needed. They would stand together. The raiders appeared between the trees, dozens of them, their armor reflecting the dim morning light. Their leader raised a long spear, its tip glowing with strange energy. Daniel had seen such weapons cut through tanks. His jaw tightened. The tigress mother roared, a sound that shook the forest, and the cub gave a sharp cry, standing between them with a courage far too big for its small body. Daniel felt the weight of the moment press on him. This was no longer just survival. This was war. He moved fast, scanning the ground for anything useful. Fallen branches, broken stones, twisted metal left from old machines. He grabbed what he could, building traps as the raiders advanced. He set a branch sharpened into the ground, tied it with vines, and pulled a wire tight across a narrow path. His hands worked with the memory of old battles. The tigress mother kept the enemy's eyes on her, standing tall, her growl daring them to come closer. The cub followed Daniel, copying him, gathering small stones, dropping them in piles as if helping. For a moment, despite the fear, Daniel almost smiled. Then the raiders charged. Nets flew first, cutting the air like deadly shadows. Daniel rolled aside, his trap snapping tight as one raider fell onto sharpened wood. The tigress mother leaped forward, slamming two more to the ground with her claws. The cub darted, biting at a raider's ankle, distracting him long enough for Daniel to drive his knife into the back of its neck. The fight was chaos, each second filled with screams, roars, and blood. Daniel's arms shook, his lungs burned, but he did not stop. He fought with everything left inside him, because stopping meant death. The leader of the raiders pushed through the chaos, his glowing spear pointed straight at Daniel. The strike came fast, faster than Daniel could dodge. He lifted his arm, bracing for pain, but the tigress mother crashed into the leader before the blow could land. Her claws tore into his armor, sparks flying, her roar shaking the trees. The leader struck back, stabbing her side. She howled, blood spilling, but she did not fall. She pinned him with fury, her fangs inches from his throat. Daniel saw his chance. He grabbed a fallen spear from the ground and thrust it with all his strength. The weapon pierced the leader's chest. The glow faded from his weapon as he fell. The raiders froze. For a heartbeat, their courage broke. The cub roared, a small but fierce sound that carried across the battlefield. Daniel stood tall, chest heaving, his hand still on the bloody spear. The tigress mother staggered, blood dripping from her wound, but her eyes were fire. She turned to the remaining raiders and let out a roar so deep and terrible that even the forest seemed to bow. The raiders broke. They ran into the shadows, leaving their dead behind. The forest grew silent once more. Daniel dropped the spear, rushing to her side. The wound in her ribs was deep, her silver fur stained red. The cub cried, pressing against her leg in panic. Daniel tore his shirt into strips, pressing it hard against the wound. She growled at the pain, her claws twitching, but she did not push him away. He worked quickly, binding the wound as best he could, his hands steady though his heart pounded. He had seen soldiers die from wounds like this, but he refused to let her fall. Not after everything they had survived together. The tigress mother breathed heavy, her gaze fixed on him. In those glowing eyes, Daniel saw something new. No longer suspicion, no longer mere tolerance. It was respect, born from blood and fire. She had fought beside him, and he had stood beside her. He saved her when even her strength was not enough. The cub purred softly, pressing its head against Daniel's arm, its trust absolute. For the first time, Daniel felt like more than a survivor. He felt like he belonged. He was no longer just a human lost in war. He was part of something greater, a bond that even death could not break. The sun broke through the trees, shining down on the broken ground. Daniel stood tall, his hand resting on the cub's head, his other hand steadying the tigress mother. They had won this battle, but the war was not over. The raiders would return, stronger, fiercer, and more prepared. Yet in his heart, Daniel knew something important had changed. He was not alone anymore. Together, with the tigress mother and her cub, he had become something new, a protector, a fighter, a name the raiders would learn to fear. The forest was quiet after the battle, but it was not peace. Daniel knew the silence of war. It was the silence of survivors breathing while enemies gathered again in the distance. He leaned against a tree, sweat dripping down his face, his clothes torn and bloodied. The cub lay curled beside him, safe but tired, its chest rising with each small breath. The tigress mother stood nearby, her wound wrapped in strips of cloth Daniel had tied. She was still strong, though her body shook with pain, yet her eyes burned with unbroken fire. She was not finished. Neither was he. They traveled slowly through the ruins of the land, moving where shadows offered safety. Daniel supported the tigress mother when her steps faltered, though she hated to lean on him. The cub ran ahead, chasing insects and glowing leaves, its small spirit unbroken despite the darkness that hunted them. Daniel felt something strange in his chest as he watched them. He had lost his own family in the war, but here, in the strangest place, he had found something that felt like one. He had not chosen it, yet it had chosen him. When they reached the edge of the mountains, the world opened before them. A valley stretched wide, filled with the remains of alien camps, fires burning, banners torn. The cub growled, ears flat. Daniel saw it too. The raiders had gathered their full force. Hundreds of them armored, their leaders shouting commands. Spears glowed with fire, drums thundered, and strange banners rose like teeth against the sky. This was not a raid. This was the end. They had come to crush everything that remained. Daniel's chest tightened. Against such numbers, they could not win. Yet his heart refused to surrender. The tigress mother looked at him, her wound bleeding. Again her fur dark with dust. She growled, low and sharp, her meaning clear. She would fight even if it killed her. The cub pressed against her leg, trembling but ready. Daniel clenched his fists. He had faced impossible odds before. He remembered the screams of his people, the fire that destroyed his world. He would not see it happen again, not to them. He picked up a broken flagpole from the ground, sharpening its edge against stone. His voice was steady as he spoke, though she did not understand his words. Then we fight, together. The raiders charged when they saw them. The ground shook under their steps, the sound of war echoing across the valley. Daniel stood at the front, the tigress mother beside him, the cub between them. Fear burned through him, but courage burned brighter. The first raiders reached them, their spears flashing. Daniel's trap snapped, a line of hidden spikes he had set earlier tearing through their front ranks. The tigress mother leaped into the air, her claws ripping armor apart, her roar so fierce that the enemy stumbled. The cub darted between them, biting ankles, scratching faces, fighting with all its tiny might. Together, they became something greater than fear. The battle raged. Like fire, Daniel fought with weapons he stole from fallen enemies, his body moving with the memory of old wars. Each strike, each cut, was fueled not only by survival but by something deeper. He was no longer fighting for himself. He was fighting for them. The tigress mother bled, but she stood unbroken, each strike of her claws tearing down those who dared to come close. The cub, though small, fought like a spark of lightning, fearless and quick. The raiders, once certain of victory, began to falter. They had not expected a human to stand beside a beast. They had not expected unity stronger than death. The leader of the raiders appeared once more, taller than the rest, his armor glowing with strange light. His weapon burned, cutting through trees like paper. He roared, pointing at Daniel, calling him out as prey. Daniel's chest rose with heavy breath, but he did not move back. He raised his broken spear, his eyes steady. The tigress mother growled, stepping to his side, her cub pressed between them. The three stood as one. The leader charged. Daniel met him head-on, the tigress striking from the side, the cub leaping onto his chest. The fight was brutal, but it ended with a single cry. The leader fell, his weapon shattering, his body broken in the dust. The battlefield grew silent. The raiders stared in disbelief. Their leader was dead, struck down not by one, but by three, by a human, a cub, and a tigress mother who had chosen him. Slowly, one by one, the raiders dropped their weapons. They backed away, their courage gone. Some fled into the trees, others bowed low, unwilling to face the same fate. The valley that had once roared with war fell quiet. For the first time since the invasion, silence meant victory. Daniel stood, his chest heaving, his body shaking, but his spirit unbroken. The tigress mother stepped forward, towering above him, her wound still bleeding but her head held high. She looked at him long and deep. Then, with slow grace, she lowered herself, bowing her head in front of him. The cub followed, pressing against his leg, purring softly. Daniel froze, his breath caught. He understood. In their law, in their bond, this was more than respect. This was recognition. He was no longer an outsider. He was their protector. Their chosen one. The sun rose over the valley, burning away the smoke, lighting the land with gold. Daniel stood with the cub at his side and the tigress mother behind him, their shadows stretching long over the ground. He had come into this war alone, broken, without hope. Now he was not alone. He had family, trust, and purpose. The raiders had learned fear. The cub had found safety, and the tigress mother had found in him something no battle could take away. Humanity's strength was not only in weapons, but in loyalty, in courage, and in bonds no enemy could break. And from that day, Daniel was not just a survivor, he was the chosen protector,